So my name is Joanna Walker and I'm welcoming you to the Sci-Fi webinar on behalf of our partners, the cities of Mechelen, Bruges, Delft and Saint-Quentin, our knowledge partners, the University of Southampton, for whom I work, and Freiburg Numeric, and our network partners, Cambridge Clean Tech and Agoria. So I'm Joanna Walker, as I said, at the University of Southampton, the UK, in the Web and Internet Science Department, and I research innovation with open data and data sharing, and I've been working on the Sci-Fi project since 2017. In Sci-Fi, we have two main audiences who are interested in building, in co-creating, really, dashboards. They are the municipal authorities, the cities who are commissioning pilot data-driven services for their citizens, and the technology companies they're working with, who are building these pilots over a 6-month period. So if you with us today are listening later, are in either of these audiences, you will hopefully find something of use to you in this webinar. And if you're from another group of stakeholders, welcome. And the various best practices I am talking about today are relevant to all dashboards. I'm going to start today about talking about why you might want to use a dashboard before going into some more detail about what they should contain and who they are for. I'll briefly touch on some of the traps to avoid with dashboards before identifying 10 best practices and giving examples of each. If, after this presentation, you're interested in discovering more about dashboards, there is another Sci-Fi webinar from 2019 on best practices and city dashboards, which was given by my colleague Jackie Ailing, which goes into more depth on the context and on the ethics of dashboards and has plenty of other examples of good and less good practice. And I would recommend taking a look at that. You can find it on our YouTube channel. So the first question here is, why dashboards? Dashboards as city projects bringing together a number of indicators and metrics are not new, and they've been popular since the 1990s. Let's start with contextualizing dashboards. This framework here is from a publication that you can find in the resources section of the Sci-Fi website, which is at www.smartcityinnovation.eu. It's called Citizen-Centric Services for Smarter Cities. The last but not least step of the implementation of a service in our framework is the visualization of the results. Visualization is crucial both for presenting the results of the service to citizens and to enable data analysts on the council side to be better and more effective at their jobs. The particularities of each service dictate the best way to visualize data and information. And in our framework, we consider the visualization sketching an important part of the co-design phase. And I'll be coming back to that. In the context of smart cities, the most used visualization tools are dashboards. Dashboards visualize a consolidated set of data for a certain purpose, which enables users to see what is happening, and this is important, to initiate actions. They are instruments to reduce information asymmetry, whether between citizens and council, or field operatives and central departments, or departments and the central council. Through dashboards, important information scattered across open data portals and feeds around the web gather into a cohesive and understandable location. For the public, they serve as a way to increase accountability, transparency, and even citizen engagement and participation by enabling a feedback loop to citizens. For cities and city management, they enable monitoring and analysis for faster and more accurate decision making. So why dashboards? And I'm going to talk here about data use. Dashboards offer two main benefits, according to Professor Rob Kitchen, whose work I would highly recommend if you want to go into this further. They are, firstly, a means to assess, guide and resource daily operational practices across public services, or to provide wider contextual information that shapes policy formulation and planning. But we can break that down further. Having a dashboard enables you to have an opportunity to make the most of your data. It helps you break data silos. It offers an opportunity to integrate your data feeds into one helpful place. It enables you, or should kind of provoke the idea of breaking data out of multiple legacy systems and bringing it together in one interoperable platform. It should be a way for you to employ your open data and possibly when benchmarking the open data of other cities. It reduces the need for your staff or public to have data or analytical skills to explore data or identify trends. And it helps you make intelligent decisions based on context. So also, it can facilitate sharing in reports or social media if you have created useful visualizations. It allows you to improve performance by monitoring service levels and identifying areas for improvement. It gives you a real-time understanding, enables responding to incidents in that real time, or at a near time to it, communicating to citizens, and also allows you to monitor performance metric driven government. But what I mean by that is checking whether you are in fact measuring the right things. So here's a couple, excuse me. Here's a couple of well-known examples of what I call mega dashboards. The first is an actual physical room, and in translation, it's the center of operations for the prefecture of Rio in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. As you can see here, it's a data-driven city operations center that pulls together into a single location real-time data streams from 30 agencies, including traffic and public transport, municipal and utility services, emergency and security services, weather, information generated by the employees and public, including that generated by social media, as well as administrative and statistical data. And obviously this has a huge staff working 24/7 on analytics and services. The other example of a mega dashboard is, which you may be familiar with already, it's not so physical, but it's more of a practice, and that's CityStat. CityStat is a process by which city employees need to report face-to-face on the key indicators of their departments on a regular basis and provide answers for why they are over or underachieving. An MIT article I read about it described it as confrontational, although whether they meant that the city was confronting its achievements and shortcomings head on, or whether it was confrontational to its employees, wasn't entirely clear. So we aren't talking today about anything on this scale which may well be of some kind of comfort to some of you. However, the dashboards described that I just talked about just now, the Rio de Janeiro and CityStat, they fall within the boundaries of the outline that we have here on this slide. So dashboards provide these diverse audiences of administrators, businesses, citizens, planners, and policy makers with data and visualizations, commonly about what we have in the right-hand column here, which is traffic flow, real-time information, such as traffic flow, weather, indicator trends, informational maps, the opportunity to report issues, and links to city apps. Now, your dashboard that you're working on or intending to create, or you already have, may not be intended for all these audiences, for all these purposes, but it will certainly be attempting to do some of these things for some of these audiences with data and interactive visualizations. Most of the dashboards we can see online are obviously intended for external audiences, so I'll mostly be using external facing examples during this talk, but the principles will still hold. So what do we mean when we talk about indicators? Indicators are recurrent quantified measures that can be tracked over time to provide information about changes pertaining to a particular phenomenon. There is actually an ISO standards for indicators for smart cities, which I really recommend you look at. Not only does this point to what should be measured, this also enables cities to benchmark with each other when their indicators are derived and measured in the same way. And it's also linked to the Sustainable Cities ISO standard. So there are different types of urban indicators that vary in why you would use them and how. Single indicators consist of the measurement or statistic related to a single phenomenon. Why am I using that word? Total number of children in education, for example. The most desirable single indicators are direct measures that are well defined. They are unambiguous. We know what they mean. They were collected quantitatively. We haven't translated them from some kind of qualitative measure. And they measure what they claim to measure, i.e. they are representative. here are some reasons that I've gathered from the literature that people employ single indicators. They purport to be objective, neutral and value-free. We will come back to that. They appear to be independent of external influence. They are telling you a fact that is. No one's affecting it. They are traceable over time. They are sensitive to change. They are replicable. You can also verify it. You know, if your dashboard is telling you that it's you have 50 children in education in a certain district of a city, you can go and count them. They should be easy to interpret, and often they can be timely. So that's that is when you have direct single indicators, and you can also have indirect single indicators. For instance, where we use patent applications as a proxy for innovation because we can't measure innovation directly. Okay, apologies. Let me just see what slide I'm on here. Okay, it therefore stands to reason if we have single indicators, we also have composite indicators, and the one that most people are familiar with is a deprivation indices, where there is no one thing that stands for deprivation. There are a whole host of issues, and they are compiled in a composite index. And these indicators can be used in different ways. The first is as descriptive indicators, where we get insight into something such as noise levels or air quality, for instance. We might use these as evidence for policy formulation, for planning, or for targeting resources. The second is performance indicators, and those indicators aid us in assessing whether goals and objectives are being met, or the efficiency. They let us assess the efficiency of a policy or a program or of a department or an organization. And lastly, we have predictive indicators, where indicators are used to predict future situations, such as when bins will need emptying, to use a prosaic example. Here, indicators are used as a key input along with other data, so other reference or baseline data, into a variety of predictive forecasting models. And benchmarking is, of course, and I referred to this earlier, when we can use other city data for comparisons. So we have multiple kinds of contributors who are possible in dashboards and multiple audiences who I've already briefly touched on. Data in the dashboard does not simply have to belong to what the city owns. It's possible that a city actually combines and partners with other organizations and agencies to include private, municipal and privately generated municipal data. This is where, for instance, we have a situation such as in Scifi, where a pilot service, a pilot program is running, and the data is being generated by the third party, by the technology company, but it is effectively municipal data because that is in the agreement. And so all this data can be, again, in internal dashboards or externally facing dashboards. And I just want to briefly give an example here, which is the Rio de Janeiro again. They're quite a leader in this area, and Waze, which is a kind of a social GPS traffic app for smartphones. They combined to combine the open data from Rio City Hall and citizen generated content that's collected through Waze based on the routes people have taken. And this allowed much better insight into the traffic situation in the city, which allowed both the city and Waze to deliver a better service. And they created 2 dashboards for this. The first was for the city, for its situation room, and it showed in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the location of traffic jams and accidents on a giant screen. And that helped dispatch operators decide the best teams to deploy for an incident. Now, the second set of dashboards presents the same or similar data, was specially designed for the public, and they installed 10 screens at the 10 most congested junctions at the entrance to downtown Rio. And this showed drivers the 2 fastest alternative routes to town from the point of the junction according to live data. So this use case highlights the convenience of public and private players sharing data and expertise for mutual benefit. However, I would say in this situation, there was no co-design phase for deciding what would be displayed in the public dashboards. And this leaves questions over whether 2 is the right amount of alternative routes to show to assist drivers, and whether drivers actually required further information, e.g. parking facilities, in order to make a decision as to which alternative to use. Okay, and I just want to highlight some assumptions about dashboards here, and I've bracketed, are they dangerous? Because if we are making these assumptions, they may lead us down some paths we don't want to go down. And so dashboards they can show you what has been selected. Now, in some way, even though this seems very neutral and the truth, it does mean it will have been translated in some way by the data pipeline. Someone will have decided how that data will be selected and presented, and they are both separated from and influenced by the politics of a city. And let me give you an example about that on, for instance, air quality. Air quality can seem very neutral, perhaps, you know, you say, well, if we have, you know, this level of NO2 at this location, that's just a fact. It's not political. But of course, if the city is particularly worried that there is no policy for dealing with NO2 at that part of the city, it may not want to gather that information and show it on a dashboard. And that's what I mean by they're separated from and influenced by the politics of the city. They are not neutral. There has been a decision about what's showing them, what's being shown. And the other assumption that's dangerous about dashboards, and I think everybody who's ever been involved in any software project or data project knows that it's a mistake to assume that once you've built it, it's going to run forever and everyone's going to use it. So they are not necessarily sustainable. We'll talk about how to make them sustainable in our best practices. And there's much more about these kinds of dangerous assumptions that can be made about dashboards on the other webinar in our YouTube channel. But in this presentation, we'll focus on trying to improve the process by which someone decides how data will be selected and presented. Okay, so here are my 10 best practices for city dashboards. And these were really selected from practice and experience. They weren't selected in a particularly quantitative manner, but you will find this in the literature, and hopefully they will reflect your experience and be relevant to what you want to do. So my 10 best practices here is to be aware that what is measured is what becomes important or gets done or gets focused on. So bring that awareness to when you're building your city dashboard. Another good practice is to consider your audiences and to use user stories. And we'll go through what those are when building them. This sounds really, really obvious, but it's important to present your information meaningfully. And I've got some examples of where perhaps it is less meaningful for us to look at and understand how easy it is to fall into a trap of not presenting information meaningfully. It's important to use best visualization practice, and we'll touch on what those practices might be. Using appropriate granularity and timeliness is also vital. You also need to think about the data literacy levels, especially where you are not really going to know what those data literacy levels might be, i.e. if it's public facing. Ensure your data makes sense. I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but again, we have examples where I hope, like you'll think, oh, I'm not entirely sure what that means. Does that make any sense whatsoever? And we all remember the statement, garbage in, garbage out. And check for personal data and outliers. Again, it may seem really obvious what is personal data and what isn't, but that is not necessarily true. And hopefully my example will show you that. My 9th best practice here, these are in no particular order, if they should all be applied, is to make sure your dashboard guides action. And finally, to ensure that it is safe, sustainable and interoperable. So let's move here to our first 2 best practices. So for both of these best practices, you need to think about your stakeholders and their activities. Who are the stakeholders of your dashboard? What do they want to know to help them do their job, whatever it is? The best way to do this is to talk to them, shadow them, find out what they are doing and how they are doing it. That might be more challenging if they're external, but it's still possible. What you select to measure to display on the dashboard is going to take on an importance that will push it above other metrics and indicators, even if that is absolutely false. Everyone is going to look to that metric, to that information, and to demand to know why it is or isn't this, that, or the other. Conversely, if you do not identify the metric that is actually going to help someone do their job, the service will certainly fail. It sounds obvious, but apparently it isn't always obvious. Frequently, dashboards are designed based on the software designers, or in the case of the Internet of Things, on the hardware developers' view of what is important, not the view of the user. User stories are a way to make sure you capture that. User stories start with personas. Personas represent actual users who have certain tasks and certain skill sets. These personas, when combined with a need and a purpose, create the stories. These can be written as persona plus need plus purpose. These personas will fall within types of users: power users, the person in charge who's using it most often; functional users, possibly operatives in the field; and policy and management users. Now, if the first step is to pick meaningful indicators, the second step is to present them meaningfully. This is the Dublin dashboard, created as a project by the City of Dublin and Maynooth University. Now, I absolutely do not want it to come over as if I am criticising this dashboard. In fact, I am not sure if it is in active use at the moment. It is just that the data showing on here when I looked at it helped illustrate some points I want to make. In the middle, you can see that we have this issue with making sure your data makes sense. So I'm not familiar with the M50, but I'm guessing it doesn't only take 1 minute to drive south on it. And that's the top line middle indicator here. But what I'm really getting to is what steps we can take to make sure indicators communicate as much as possible. So if we look at the water levels in the purpley blue in the middle under environmental indicators, these haven't changed, or at least the ones at Broadmeadow and Waldron's Bridge haven't. And we can see that because they do give us this nice little kind of level indicator in the circle, which helps. Icon in the circle. So they haven't changed, but it'd be good to know over what time period. Have they not changed today? Have they not changed this week, this year? We're also not really clear what units the water is being measured in. Presumably meters, but we're not sure. Could be centimeters. In fact, I hope it's centimeters because the water level at Waldron's Bridge is 30 meters. Possibly centimeters, I don't know, because I have no understanding of the context here. What percentage has it gone up at Waldron's Bridge? Is it a worrying amount in total, either because there will not be sufficient water or too much? And if you go to the level below that, we have more information with the sounds because they have given us decibels. But to read this indicator, you have to be not only familiar with the area, so I know what Irish Town Stadium is, I know what Chancery Park is. Blessington Street Basin, I don't know whether it's motorway, a station, or another arena. But you also have to know what decibels mean and also what's a problematic level of decibels. So they've all gone down. Are they down from a dangerous level? Are they down simply because nothing's happening at Irish Town Stadium? For me, right now, these are creating more questions than answers. So let's translate these problems into an internal dashboard for, say, waste collection. Imagine if someone comes along and sees an indicator showing the trash level has gone up. Great. What was the baseline? Does it mean it needs collecting yet? If we are not showing units, how do we know what kind of waste removal facility we need to provide? Will a person with a sack be sufficient? Or do we need a truck? Or will we get there with our huge truck only to find it slightly full? How are this kind of level of description of meaningfulness in our indicators, how is that going to help us understand the overall waste problem in our city? Remember, the main operator is not the only person who will see and use this dashboard. The actual cleaning operatives, the director of the department, the city aldermen and town councillors will all see this. And if they cannot use it or find it perplexing, the dashboard will. I guarantee you, die a quiet death. Now, clearly, as I mentioned before, indicators can become confrontational and can be used as political tools, even on internal dashboards. No one likes to see a sea of red indicators flashing at them. So the decisions about how to present the information need to be taken carefully, but they do need to be taken. In data visualization, as well as the two planes, the X and Y axis, as we're more often calling them, and of course text, so we have those tools, there are 6 retinal variables. These are color hue, so red is alarming, green means go or good. Color value, stronger to paler variety, so grayscale of the same color. Orientation, usually horizontal and vertical are the easiest for us to identify. Shape, circles, triangles, squares, etc. Texture and size. These help us present more information in a 2-dimensional space. And so consideration should be given to using all these tools at our disposal to create meaning for our indicators. I would just note that it's important to take care when using color hue, as not all colors have meaning, and be careful when you use color value that you don't end up with too many in too small a space to be distinguishable. I'm sure you've seen visualizations like that. However, in general, the human eye can recognize more values of one color than it can recognize different colors. Blue, purple, and green are less intense colors, so this is great. We have that here on the Dublin dashboard, and they're easier on the human eye than, say, yellow, pink, or red. Okay, so I've got another example here. And the 2 best practices I'd like to illustrate now are timeliness and considering the data literacy of the audience. This is from the Manchester Intelligence Hub. There are a number of interactive visuals for all kinds of aspects of Manchester: demographic statistics, road traffic accidents, crime, education, and universal credit, which is our welfare system. This is a Manchester City Council initiative. I'm not entirely sure if all the data is actually open data here, as I can't find a license, but it's certainly publicly available and intended for use, as when I open the quick guide we handily have here, it tells me how to download and save the data. So a couple of things caught my eye here. The first is timeliness. In the top right, with my lovely circle, the yellow circle there, you can see that they tell us, the user, when the next update is going to be, which is great because it lets us know how up to date and relevant the stats are. The less good news is that the road traffic data is now 2 years out of date, although it will be updated next month. And I say out of date for this rather than hasn't been updated for 2 years, because 2 years is plenty of time for road layouts or road user behavior or traffic patterns to change. So we may not be seeing the most useful data here, although it does give us a trend over time for each ward, which is what is highlighted or should be highlighted in the bottom right-hand corner, and I'll come back to that. Now, I know that most, if not all, of the dashboards in Scifi are going to be IoT dashboards, which update frequently. However, it's still good practice, wherever your data is coming from, to indicate when the next update is due and when the last update was sent. For data flows from multiple sensors, this is of course not practicable, so some form of indicator that an update target has not been met is necessary. Back to the trend over time in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm going to ignore the fact that I don't find accidents greater than total accidents a very revealing title. I'm just going to remind everyone to always use a clear title. So this line here in this graph appears when the user clicks on a ward, either in the map or on the list. Now, I discovered this by accident poking around, and I consider myself quite data literate, but I didn't necessarily come to this and think, I know how to make this line appear. I know a line will appear and I know how to make it appear. For the average person on the street at whom this is aimed, how do they discover this? Remember, it may not be possible or feasible or resource appropriate to have to train every user on the use of the dashboard. So please make them as intuitive as possible. There is actually plenty of space here to include a self-explanatory title and to write, click on a ward name to show accidents, or similar guidance. And here, 2 more I'd like to give you examples of. And here they are: sense checking. Remember, that was garbage in and garbage out, and personal data. So this is the childhood obesity and excess weight dashboard from Manchester. I also don't want to point out, I am not suggesting this dashboard is deserving of nothing but criticism. It's clearly a really valid attempt to be transparent and communicative with citizens. It just helpfully does let me bring up these issues of ensuring the data makes sense and using personal data. So if we look at my large yellow circle on the right-hand side, I checked using the handy About This Data tab just above the graph. So there are some really, really good practices here in this dashboard. So I used this About the Data tab to check exactly what the data was showing. And it told me it was showing the children from the Deansgate ward who were measured under the National Child Measurement Programme. So I found it unusual that only 3 children were measured. And I checked some other wards to see if it looked like the data was incomplete. The count seemed sensible for other wards, so perhaps indeed only 3 children were measured and the others were all off school that day, or chose not to be measured, or there are simply not many children in the reception year, the kindergarten year, in this ward, or they didn't opt in. It's an opt-in program. However, what did surprise me was that a portion of 1 child was carrying excess weight, and even less of 1 child was obese. Broadly, we have 3 kinds of data we're going to look at here. So we have continuous, discrete, and nominal data. Continuous is data that can be continuously refined, such as rainfall or air quality measurements. Nominal data is where the data can be placed into categories, such as types of transport or whether a citizen is employed or unemployed, a school child, student, or retired. Discrete data can essentially be counted in integers like road traffic accidents and indeed children. This is discrete data. In whole units, there cannot be less than 1 child. So I have queries about the sense of this data. It needs a really good check. Garbage in, garbage out. The question here is, how is the data being checked either before or after it is loaded into the dashboard? And if you look at the circle on the left, you see the other problem. Where there is very little data or distinctive outliers, the risk is that the data becomes identifiable in some way. At the moment, I cannot identify this 1 obese child, but it may very well be simple for me to do so, possibly accidentally and certainly maliciously. This is not just personal, but sensitive information about 1 child in 1 ward. In this case, I would have been tempted to set up my dashboard so that whenever there were fewer than, for instance, 5 data points regarding people per ward, it showed as insufficient data. If it was about traffic lights, I wouldn't have the same kind of worries about it, but because it's about sensitive data, I would want to limit my outliers or my low data points. If you want to follow up on personal data, there are 3 Scifi webinars on our YouTube channel examining the GDPR and data protection impact assessments, and I'd recommend looking at those. So we're getting to the end now of our best practices. And I want to talk about action and sustainability. And a very common phrase we use in academia, and it's not a very academic one, is so what? It's a common trap we fall into as junior researchers. We carefully and rigorously collect all kinds of data, we strictly outline our methodology, and we wring our hands over any issues with the data that we are unable to remove or control. We perform extensive and in-depth and complicated analysis. We lose sleep. We eat too much. Many thousands of words and diagrams and frameworks and models later, we hand our work of art to our supervisor or primary investigator. Okay, they say, so what? And you need to ensure your users are not left admiring your use of colour value and your careful guidance on your timeliness of updates, but wondering similarly, so what? Now that so what can mean so many things, depending on whether the dashboard is internal or external, for guiding daily operational practice or for guiding decisions. So let's look at our hypothetical waste dashboard. It needs to be clear on the action to be taken. Send an operative this week, today, urgently, now, with a bag, with a truck, etc. Leaving a complicated inference space will certainly affect both the immediate usability and long-term sustainability of such a dashboard. So be clear on what action the user should take. In terms of long-term sustainability, the usual first step, which is getting the CEO on board, can be tricky in a city environment where the CEO can change after elections. However, there are plenty of other steps to take. Employing the best practices outlined above in order to firstly remove barriers to use and secondly offer long-term value for stakeholders are key. Another way to ensure sustainability, and one that is absolutely vital in any data-driven environment, is via interoperability. Using a platform such as Fiware, which is used in Scifi, that enables interoperability is crucial. Let's go back to the Rio Operations Centre. In order to improve the city's responses to heavy rains and floods, Rio Operations Centre launched the ICOR Challenge Smart City Pitch. Within this context, the We for City platform, which is powered by Fiware, is being used to structure a smart data lake that integrates real-time and historical information from numerous institutions and systems, including civil defence, real-time cameras, the City Hall again, weather radars, various social media. And this kind of interoperability means not only is your dashboard potentially able to engage with many other lots of sets of data and data sets, but also should another initiative come along within your city, then you can integrate yours into that and create even more value for users. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope that hasn't taken too long. If there are any questions, I would be delighted to take them. If you're listening after the fact and you have questions, please do email us at hello@smartcityinnovation.eu or tweet us at smartcityinov. But I'm now going to hand over to the moderator and ask if we have any questions right now.
Hi, Joanna. We have a question from Alina. She asked, do you have an example of a dashboard to monitor the performance of projects proposed in the major's election program?
Wow, I don't have one. I think we could probably find one though. So is that okay if we have a look and get back?
I think so. And I don't see any other questions for now.
I mean, on the election front, I think again you've got to consider: is this an internal? Is this external? Who is using the data? What are they using it for? Is it, how sustainable? Would you want to compare sets of elections? Do you want to compare how wards are voting? If you obviously there is a huge amount of data out there about, it wasn't an election, it was a vote. It was the Brexit vote. I can't believe I'm still talking about this. But there are so many amazing visualizations about how the Brexit vote broke down, because there's a visualization which most people have seen, which kind of makes Scotland and London very different colors from the rest of the United Kingdom. But then if you start breaking down that into greater granularity, as I touched on earlier, then you are getting more in-depth information about it's certainly around elections. Are you going to break it down to not just it depends which kind of election it is, obviously. Even at a kind of national election level, you can still break that data down at ward or district or sub-district level and get all kinds of granularity. So realistically, I would say two things about the election dashboard. Is go and look at some of the visualizations that have been used over Brexit, because there are many, many, many. Some are really excellent and insightful, and I'm sure you would get some information from there. And secondly, consider who it's for, over how much period of time, and what you're going to be able to show, what you're not going to be able to show. And thirdly, this thing about granularity, I think, is vital. I hope that was helpful.
Johanna, we have one more question from Tim Reynolds. I can read that out for you. I wish to address ontology common description formats which are agreed by municipal organizations across EU or the world, which are translatable and map across character sets and which will facilitate the semantic web. At Aquamatics, we are trying to deploy an ontology swim for water infrastructure for communities. Proprietary tech developers intuitively trying to lock the data encompassed within classes and methods to achieve second revenue streams. I'm not really. Do you want to respond?
Which industry was this in?
This is the water industry.
Oh, okay.
Potable water, foul water, grey water, and of course blue water. And drainage, which obviously feeds into flooding and water supply issues.
Yes.
And also food supply.
This is covered in the water is covered in the Smart Cities ISO standard.
Yeah, we know that.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. But the problem we've got is actually how do we get it deployed? Because the decision makers, the water industry by definition is quite, the drinking water industry is quite conservative, and they're not really prepared to engage in an open standard, if you like, merely to describe the data. Okay, it's fine for security cameras. You know, there are industries which are driving this, not least some cities are actually creating the dashboards as the examples you've shown. But actually, until we start describing the data in a shared format, I mean, NASA were doing a lot of this with the suite ontology framework.
Right.
You know, we can't really start harvesting that data and using it for other often undescribed requirements.
Yeah. As you say, like just working out how to deploy something is usually the biggest challenge. Do you have any pilots in position at the moment?
Well, we've got a number of pilots working on small water providers. So, for example, the large estate holdings that have their own private water supply system and pumping systems. We're able to convince them that they need to adopt an open framework. We've published this and make it available. It's not, but we're aware that actually proprietary tech companies want to control that data. And they often use security as the get-all for that. But actually, the bottom side is to secure the bottom line, to secure the revenue streams, either during the 3-year commissioning period or subsequently. And of course, that just breaks everything if the company's not in locking the data into their own proprietary descriptors.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm afraid that is beyond my field of expertise on, but where to go really on that beyond the ISO standard and beyond working.
Are you seeing EU actually pushing forward? Because obviously, the large cities like Rio and Manchester find they've got large budgets, but the smaller cities, particularly those who are expanding, particularly those in developing world, or developing economies, that they need a framework of data descriptors before they can even start moving to dashboards. And the danger we see is that many of these small municipal engineers are actually commissioning dashboard developers that go ahead and just map an existing, ThingWorks are very good at building dashboards for Industry 4.0. But again, unless that data goes in and is described in a format, and obviously EU with 27 languages.
Yeah.
How is, for example, a small city in the Netherlands or a small town in the Netherlands using a framework that can easily just drag and drop into their municipal dashboard?
Well, and this is a challenge that we work on in Scifi. This is why we've, working on interoperability in terms of both, using FiWare and also when we engage with the pilot technology companies we're working with, ensuring that interoperability is one of our number one issues. I don't know if there's someone from one of the cities here who wants to talk about that a little bit. Probably not that, you know, metadata before breakfast becomes scary. Before lunch. I can only say good luck with that one, because you know,
unfortunately we're a small startup, so you know we're desperately looking for revenue streams. And so whilst we develop this open ontology based upon the NASA suite, unfortunately NASA, I think, have actually parked. Are you aware of the NASA suite description framework?
Water.
A very interesting description framework, which we've based our infrastructure on. All our ThingWorks deployments use this open framework that we've called SWIM, which we're happy to share to any organization. But we haven't got the resources to really promote it on a global scale, which we believe needs to happen. Particularly this character set translation. The fact that you look at the EU. I'm not quite sure how many character sets we've got in the EU, but it must be, well, there are 27 languages, aren't there? So there must be at least 15 different character sets, and calling a spade across all of the 27 countries is not easy.
No, the EU data portal has to do this for harmonized metadata.
Exactly.
So they're quite expert in that.
And have you pinned into that harmonized metadata infrastructure?
We at the University of Southampton, we do have other projects that work with that, although exactly. We haven't been doing it on Scifi.
Yeah. If I can interrupt, there are a few more questions from the audience.
Absolutely.
James Pete, who's asking, I'm preparing a dashboard strategy for our smart city projects. Can you recommend any good resources for me to look into to inform my strategy? And the second one is from Evan Beckett. Would you recommend any free low-cost tools for creating dashboards that SMEs can use, specifically to display data on maps?
Oh, had that second one kind of lined up. I'm Judiths Recommendations might be able to actually tell more about the second one. First one, I really recommend reading anything you can by Professor Rob Kitchen of Maynooth University. He's written on the praxis and practice of dashboards. They've which talks about creating that Dublin dashboard, all the things that they they started out saying, we're going to create a dashboard for you, and that paper really just talks about through the whole process from we're going to create a dashboard to having a dashboard. That's really good. Pretty much everything that he writes about on dashboards is pretty valuable. In terms of the actual software, Judith, do you have any ideas?
What I can do is I can give you some information via one of my colleagues who is more an expert in this, but on data models which are existing, which can be used in your projects, which can help to have a more streamlined dashboards afterwards. So I can ask my colleagues to give some links to some interesting solutions.
Something a bit smaller than something like CitySense or something, I guess, is what you're after.
Yeah, well, you've like sheen.org, which provides, for example, standardized data models in some domains. And sometimes it calls also cross-domain. So, for example, regarding the last question regarding the water, I know that for in the first cycle of Scifi, we had an use case in Saint-Quentin on the water consumption on sport fields. Okay, it's not in the same domain as the question earlier. But for example, we used in that use case like parcel information that came from other domains, but which could be reintegrated in in this use case, for example. So it goes a bit cross domain sometimes, but there are a lot of initiatives that are already trying to standardize data, and we can give some more information regarding this.
Great.
So if
are you working towards an open source dashboard that can be used particularly for smaller municipal authorities?
Not within this project, but there are initiatives that are trying to make things easier, like the Open Angel Smart City initiative, for example. They are working on standardization. They're trying to help cities to work with minimal interoperable methods to make it easier for cities to implement solutions, and as a result also city dashboards. But as Scifi, this is not our focus area. But again, we can give you some information if you can just give us your email address in the chat. We will make sure that we follow up after the webinar with some more concrete information.
Thank you.
And I think there are no other questions left.
Thank you everyone for your questions. That was really great, and it's great to know that you're so engaged with this. To the question about strategy, I would also really recommend watching the other webinar, which talks kind of more broadly about context and cybersecurity and ethics and privacy and issues like that.
Joanna, sorry, we have 2 more questions I see in the chat.
Okay, great.
So there's one from Ivan. Would you recommend any free low-cost tools for creating dashboards that SMEs can use, especially to display data on maps?
Well, if I'm playing data on maps, I like to look at CartoDB.
Yeah. And then there is another question from Alina. What do you think about the London dashboard? And she indicated a link in the chat.
Oh, I'll have a look. Oh, I tell you what, I have just thought about a good, easy tool for creating dashboards is Tableau. If you have a look at Tableau, I need to stop screen sharing if I'm going to look at the chat. Okay, the London one's not really loading for me, so I'm not really familiar with it. I haven't looked at it in the past. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff here that I feel that some of it is not necessarily there because someone made a decision that it's really important. For instance, stocks from Yahoo. I think everybody already has that on their phone. But yeah, I can't really see it to have a look at it. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much
For your questions and for being here and listening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.